There we go. Normally it automatically records. Sorry about that. So the session will be now recorded and put into the YouTube channel. So not only this year's fundraising Friday sessions, but for years previous, we have a whole repository of them for you. So please, if you need to rewatch this, or if you didn't grab anything in your notes, feel free to go to the link below, the bit.ly/fundraising dash Friday. And Violetta, if you could please share that in the chat for folks, that'd be great, just so they have it. Um, but yeah, we have multiple sessions that you can go back and look at, covering a number of different topics. So hopefully, um, we can answer some questions that you may have on other things as well through previous work. Great. Um, so what's available now to you is this new format of Fundraising Friday. Um, so it is now a monthly session that we are doing, as well as one-on-one individualized coaching. So we provide consulting services on a number of different things that are listed below, whether that's board trainings, annual fundraising plans, campaign planning, or even just some thought partnership on strategy for fundraising. Please feel free to reach out. You can either email Michelle Mengel at michelle@resilienceinitiative.org, or you can email me directly at kafili.at progressivemultiplier.fund. Right. And as we said before, please feel free to revisit any past sessions to get the info that you need. So the things that we'll be covering today are resourcing 101. So a breakdown of what independent revenue generation is, how we define that, what are some different ways that you can access that, and what does it mean for your organization. And then we'll go into some case studies that have examples of successful IRG projects that we've worked with groups on, with some time for some Q&A at the end. So starting with resourcing, um, so when we think of fundraising, a lot of times folks think of, grant writing as a main source of fundraising, as well as individual giving. And those are the two main buckets that people focus on to help fund their work. Fundraising for nonprofits obviously works different than for profits. There are a lot of different restrictions that exist for how we raise money, but also for most nonprofits, we do not have or have not created any form of self-generating revenue. So everything that we get has to be externally solicited. But independent revenue generation is a way for organizations to help create that type of revenue internally to help subsidize some of the cost associated with their programming and work. And so our whole philosophy about independent revenue generation is that it leads to resiliency for organizations like yours. If you have been fundraising for long enough, I'm sure you have seen funder shifts where a long-term funder may go through a strategic redesign and they no longer fund your organization or even your type of work, or a major donor changes their mind in the course of a year, and so their gift goes away, or the pandemic happens and you had to normally rely on event that you would do in person to fundraise, that you were no longer able to have that year, and how that affected your work, right? So there are many foreseen and unforeseen ways where organizations like ours can face financial ups and downs. But by diversifying our revenue streams, and even diversifying the funders within each of those revenue streams, we build resiliency. If you're hyper dependent on one or two major funders, or even one or two major funders in a certain category, if they go away, your organization is more highly susceptible to risk. So by spreading out where you get your money from, you're able to kind of counterbalance against any potential loss. So through creating those new revenue streams, we'll be able to expand our organizational reach and programming. We'll hopefully be generating more money, right? And then also reaching new folks through this type of independent revenue generating program. Folks who may not have been in our donor base originally, may not have been exposed to our organization or our work. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. It allows you to invest in your people, both through raising money and also through developing skills, connection to the community as well. Um, IRG programs tend to be similar to more of a individual giving program in nature, in the sense of you're going to collect money from a large mass of folks rather than one institution or one major funder who is going to raise like a majority of the money. So what that does is that connects you deeper with people who are in and around your work and your community, and figuring out what they want to see your organization do, and being able to connect with them at a better level. As I said before, it'll help protect you from the fickleness of philanthropy that we've seen, and as well as steady your organization against boom and bust cycles. Right now, we're in an election year, and depending on your focus area for your organization, potentially you may be seeing a lot of heightened attention based on what's happening in the news, what's happening politically or socially in our country. Those things tend to ebb and flow. So there may be years where you will receive a mass amount of unsolicited gifts, um, or a lot more institutional attention from foundations. But that may not last at that level forever. And so when that shift happens and that recess happens, having an IRG program built up and ready to go will help balance out against that loss. Right. So let's talk about just in general different types of funding, and what is available to folks. So in an ideal world, we would be able to raise all of our money directly from maybe community groups and be able to do the work that we need to do. That isn't really the the way that the world works. And so in realist terms, like, you need institutional funding to help support your work. If you're going to want to work at mass and at scale, you're going to need large sums of funding to be able to get yourself off the ground, to launch new programs, things of that nature. So some of the pros that come from institutional funding is those large sums of money, um, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even upwards from there. Building long-term relationships with program officers is a really helpful thing for you to do, and can open you up to different levels of notoriety and credibility. Depending on who the funder is, their name brand being attached to your work adds credence and visibility to your organization, which can make it easier to get additional gifts on top of that, as well as just entering the space of philanthropy, the networking, and the opportunities that exist within there. Um, there are some things that make that work a little bit difficult, though. There are way longer lead times for institutional funding. From start to finish, it can take anywhere normally between 6 to 18 months, depending on the size of the grant and your relationship with the organization, to be able to, from first email or point of contact to actually receiving the money. Um, so it's a lot harder to do institutional fundraising and make an immediate difference in your fundraising situation, especially if you are facing budget gaps or have immediate needs, right? So this is like more long-term planning money, and kind of the big rocks that you would base a lot of your work on. but they're also highly susceptible to swings. As I mentioned before, um, I've seen multiple times this year, foundations have come out with new strategies or are doing strategic redesigns, which shifts their funding priorities. Or potentially your relationship is really with the program officer themselves at the foundation and they move on. And so maybe when a new person comes in, you don't have the same level of rapport. You have to kind of rebuild that relationship. And so a lot of the trust building and things that happen with your old program officer may be gone now. Um, Also the high levels of funds can make your organization susceptible to mission creep or mission drift. So what we mean by that is growing the scope of your work tangentially out from what you originally set out to do to be able to raise money. So there might be an opportunity for you to get a grant, but the work that they really like funding isn't exactly what you want to do. So you would have to build something outside of your normal scope and size to be able to get that grant. Um, and so if that continues to happen, you may be growing in a way that is antithetical to the original purpose of the organization and the work that you wanted to be doing. Um, and then again, it's a highly relationship-based work. So the more people you know, the better it's going to be, but it's very hard to break in if people are unfamiliar with your work. Wanted to take a pause here and see if folks had any questions around um, institutional funding, and also wanted to just hear a little bit about if what I mentioned about the strategic redesigns and shifts are things that people are seeing happen with their funders right now.
Hey, this is Victoria in Louisiana with the Louisiana Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, and we, as a movement in reproductive justice, are being defunded across the Deep South entirely, which is why I'm on this call because we kind of came to depend on it, and everybody has pulled out, thinking that the South is unwinnable and kind of a lost cause, and it's hurting the movement. It's hurting people a lot.
Hey, Victoria, I'm sorry to hear that. That's also a very important thing to note. The shift oftentimes can be political, and what that means is that your region or your city or your state and where you do work, even if the work in and of itself continues to be funded, your location may not be the potential priority, right? Um, and we've seen rapid swings in and out of areas without long-term planning. And that kind of leads to the gaps that potentially you're talking about right now, Victoria, of unexpected shifts happening rapidly. And it doesn't leave time for the organizations that were funded by these groups to really build the infrastructure necessary to be able to carry on work without them. So hopefully this is going to be helpful for you. And would love to be able to continue a conversation about your work in the strategic assistance sections. Um, Anyone else having any funding shifts this year or um, grant changes? No? Okay, cool. We can keep it pushing then. Um, so some things to think about when working with institution and funders. Um, First, you want to identify appropriate grants and connect the work that the organization does to your goals. So this is going to help try and prevent against some of that mission drift that we talked about to make sure that there is like a really good fit there. Um, you want to combine your grant calendar with your other fundraising calendar, your IRG calendar. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So you can track your actual workflow and see when is a good time to be able to actually pursue a grant that has heavy proposals, or you know you have really heavy reporting coming up, so maybe now is not the best time to do an IRG program because you'll be time strapped. Um, Work with your program staff to develop language in their own words. Oftentimes they know the work much better than we do as fundraisers, so rely on them to help build some of that. Um, and develop a level of comfortability showing your organizational impact and sustainability beyond this year. We're seeing more and more in grant applications, the question, how are you going to continue this work after this grant ends, or something similar to that nature? You have to be comfortable with answering that questions. Um, and that's one way to ensure that folks will feel better about funding your work. Um, and then finally, make warm asks when you can. So what I mean by that is try and establish a relationship first, at least have a call or an email to introduce yourself or your work before you put in a grant application, just so there's some familiarity there. Right. So let's talk about IRG. So these are usually community-based programs and technically have limitless potential, because anyone in the community could be a future donor. Um, there are ways that this can help even out your cash flow. As we talked about before, think of the grants as like rocks in your cup, right? So they come at certain times and they're big and heavy allotments of money. We're talking tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is like the sand that fills in between the rocks. So IRG will come in hopefully steadily throughout the year, which will give you some cash flow, which will help alleviate any issues that you may have around funding, around payroll, especially in that in-between time between grants that where you're not getting large sums of money. It helps build connection with your community and build a brand. And it's also sustainable and flexible. You can adjust this a lot more quickly because you're in control of it rather than um, having to answer somebody else's questions and have them determine whether you are eligible or worthy of a grant or not. Some difficulties around IRG or things just to know is that it takes time to scale. With our work, we have seen that normally year 2 and 3 is when you really start seeing these programs fully blossom because it takes a lot of trial and error and knowing your donor base and being able to adjust to the things that you've learned. Um, they require more touches. So it's not just one proposal that you send out and you get a boatload of money. You're reaching out to multiple people multiple times a year to help build those relationships. Um, the size of the network can limit the amount raised depending on who you're fundraising from. So some IRG projects are highly specific around a very specific subset of folks, and so that may be limiting. So thinking through what more expansive or inclusive programs you want to run can help alleviate that. And they're systems oriented. If you do everything one by one, it is going to be very difficult for you to run this program effectively. You are talking about mass outreach and mass fundraising. So you need a large system that's able to not only customize, but make it easy for you to reach out to all those folks. Right. And so things that we need to look at when we're talking about IRG is figuring out which program fits best with our mission, our budget, and our staff. Those are probably your three biggest components that you want to think about. Creating some objectives or SMART goals around each program of what success looks like, and understanding your target demographics needs. If you are a youth organizing group, maybe you wouldn't do something that is like a big fancy gala. Like that doesn't resonate with youth, right? So you have to create programs that really align with the folks that you are working with and the community that you're serving. Segmenting and targeting and personalizing communication is of the utmost importance. You want all of this to feel like you spent time actually writing a personal email, even though it is a custom form field email or something like that. Um, You want to make sure that you connect your donors' gifts with direct impact, um, and being able to show where their money actually went to. So for instance, the Feed the Children model is like $1 a day feeds a child. There's obviously administrative costs, supply costs, all of that in there, but making that verbal connection between a gift size and an impact helps people connect with that and want to support that work because they can see where their money is going in a more literal sense. Um, as we said, we're going to leverage technology to build these systems out and focus on long-term relationship building across our donor base. And same as before, we're going to pull all of this into one tracker so we can map everything and stay on track across the course of the year. So let's talk about some different types of IRG. So these are some that you may be familiar with, which are just individual donor programs. So you have your grassroots donor programs, so wide base, small dollar donors, and you have your mid majors who are in between grassroots donors, and your major donors who are the smallest subset, but provide the largest individual gifts that you have. I'm sure all of you have, if you don't do all of this now, have at least been exposed to these. And these are like the basic forms of IRG, but we're going to talk about some other things that you can do as well. So one of those things is fee for service. If your organization creates any assets, runs any programs, provides any services to nonprofits, the government, businesses, etc., you can make money off of that as long as it's under market rate, to be able to avoid business tax. So if that is something that your organization does, think through what that might look like for you to raise money from doing that work. Um, Events. So a lot of us are familiar with the gala model, but as I said before, depending on your demographic base and who you organize with, we've had organizations do info sessions, do performances, bar crawls, or house parties even, to raise money for their organizations. Crowdfunding is another form of IRG that you can do. This is particularly good around new programs, rapid response, emerging need, anything that like crisis fundraising, things of that nature, where you can explain a finite need and a deadline and motivate people to give. Um, Membership programs are great ways of raising money. So what a true membership program does is it creates a deeper relationship between your organization and what was normally a donor into now a member. So they get deeper insights and connection into your organization through different forms, depending on whether it's a formal or informal membership program. And for that, they pay dues, whether that's yearly, monthly, but that group of folks pays into the organization for that level of access and being able to be a deeper connective part of your work. There's also peer-to-peer fundraising, um, things such as like folks running marathons, and getting people to sponsor their run or 5Ks or bikes or emerging now is digital peer-to-peer fundraising. So people streaming video games or playing music online on services such as Twitch are a great way, especially for if you have a younger demographic, Gen Z, millennial, that's a great way to fundraise from those communities. Um, on the opposite end, if you have an older donor base, planned giving is a thing that you can talk about with donors or at least set up a way to do that, so that um, people have the opportunity to give bequeaths upon their passing, which allows you for both future funding, but also can be an asset for an organization if you're looking for a credit line or a loan or something like that. You can kind of borrow against those type of things, so they're good to have, even if you don't get the cash for a number of years. Um, there's match and give programs. So this is the easiest one to set up. if you have an online donation form, add a question to the form, just asking if folks have a matching gift at their job. Yes, no, or I don't know. Um, the only answers that you shouldn't be worried about are no. If folks say yes, obviously reach back out to them and help them get signed up. And if people say I don't know, reach out to them and see if they can reach out to their HR team to figure that out. There are billions of dollars left on the board every year by people who make donations and do not know or do not sign up for a matching gift from their employer. So make sure that you incorporate that into any fundraising that you do. Um, there's also cause marketing. So partner with local businesses. Maybe it's a local coffee shop in your area, and some of the proceeds from each coffee sold go to your organization, that type of model. Um, Corporate sponsorship. So if you have an event, um, they can either sponsor the event and pay with a check, or they may do an in-kind donation. So maybe donating the space for you to host an event or donating food for the event, something like that. So that can either be the corporate sponsorship or collaborative fundraising model. And finally, merchandise, which is a great way for organizations, especially if you are front facing and directly working in a community, or even if you're in the arts, being able to sell things with your logo raises money for your org, but also increases your brand recognition within that community. Um, Finally, there is volunteering. So we don't typically think of volunteering as fundraising, but those are hours and time work that staff members were going to probably have to do. So it's a great way of saving money. So think through if there are any large corporations and companies that you have a relationship with, who are looking for volunteer opportunities for their employees, and you have things that you need done. That's a great way of saving the org money, which is essentially the same thing as raising money, um, and giving circles. So you can set up a giving circle yourself as an organization or encourage your major donors to do that themselves. Giving circles are a relatively new phenomenon. It almost works as like informal foundation. So it would be as if me and 10 of my friends made a decision that every month we each are going to donate $1,000, right? So we have a $10,000 pot, and then we choose an organization that we want to give to. So it's like almost like a gift multiplier. So instead of just working with me as a major donor and you get my $1,000, you're going to get $10,000 in that way. So you can help set that up internally or reach out to and find giving circles. Great. So a lot of different types, a lot of information. Um, Again, let's talk about what the best ones are for you and where you would want to get started with this. Um, if you were attempting to start any new project, any new program, um, you know, I think it's really important not to get overwhelmed by the complexity of potential that you can do with it, and find the easiest way to start. That way you can snowball from there and build a little bit of momentum as time goes on. It's very hard to build a robust individual giving program from scratch. But what you can do is do the base building blocks of one in year one, um, adjust in year two based off of the things that you learn, and every time you run it, add just a little bit more, a different component, and over time you will develop a really robust and good program. So just don't let the level of complexity and what you can do give you paralysis in what you can do in the short term. So again, what will determine success for this is essentially these few things here. Your individual giving program or your IRG program, excuse me, needs to align with your organizational story and your morals. Um, it has to make sense for your organization to be partaking in this particular form of revenue generation. And it has to excite your potential donor base. They have to want to get involved. It's their choice to opt into your work, so you have to give them something they get excited about. Um, you're going to need something that matches the skill set and staffing abilities of your organization at the time that you're starting it. Unless you are going to hire to do a whole new IRG program, you kind of have to work with what you have. So think through, what skills do we have? What are we good at here? How much capacity do we have, and what timeline can we work with to help build one of these programs out? And that should help determine what is an accurate and appropriate lift for you. Um, Also, they need to be easily explained, coordinated, and scaled. So just like explaining all of those, you're going to have to pitch this to dozens, hundreds, depending on your mailing list, maybe thousands of people. It should be easy for them to understand what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, how you're trying to do it, and how they can get involved. And then from there, being able to go up another level the next time you run it, and knowing how to get new folks into the program. And it has to match your capacity to invest. If you do not have the ability to run a certain type of program, starting it is not going to do you any good, and it's just going to waste time and resources. So make sure that it's the right fit for you. Even if you are severely capacity limited, there are little things that we can do, like just like we talked about with the match and gift program, that are very easy ways to just start getting you on this road and thinking about how can we maximize each and every gift that comes through our organization. Before we get into the case studies, wanted to pause here, see if anyone had any questions about the types of IRG that I just talked about, um, advice around how to get started, things of that nature. No, we're all good? Okay, great. So let's talk about case studies. So the first one is going to be donor acquisition. And these are all orgs and groups that Progressive Multiplier has worked with in our grant program. So Blue Future had reduced giving over the past years prior to this grant, and wanted to engage in a couple different tactics to help grow their IRG, diversify their revenue streams, find new donors, and be able to connect to help replenish what they lost. Um, so what the hypothesis was that if Blue Future could create a multi-pronged approach to finding and keeping small dollar donors, the org can develop a healthy and reliable funding base. So they were having a lot of non-solicited gifts that didn't really connect to anything larger. So people were coming in and out of the organization, and they were having a lot of donor churn. And so they wanted to get folks, find folks, and then keep them in the org. So they did a couple of different things. So um, they did some donor acquisition. So they spent $8,000 acquiring new names for their small dollar email program. They did some research with the org's network of activists, thinking of what are some programs that we can offer to develop a strong mentorship program that would um, create a fee for service in membership. And then the third thing that they did was develop another fee for service training program externally for progressive movement leaders, and figuring out how they can take the learnings and trainings that they had, spread them, but also use that for RevGen. So they generated nearly $25,000 in the first year off of that list that they bought for 8,000. So almost tripled their initial investment. And those are donors who will remain with the org hopefully for a long time. So they'll be able to continue to solicit those folks. Um, they constructed a pilot alumni program to help build their base and expand in the future. So they'll be able to turn that into a membership program with the dues that we talked about, um, as well as that leadership program has showed them potential that they could potentially offer this as a fee for service. So this would be a third arm for them to fundraise through. So what's really great about this is, again, to my earlier point, thinking about capacity, right? So they, instead of just trying to automatically find donors organically, they bought a list and tried to work that list and got a really good list that they raised money from, right? That saved a lot of time and energy. Instead of thinking through how do we connect with new people to build a membership program, they went back across their pool of members and figured out who are we not connecting with, our alumni. And so they activated a group that already existed within the organization, had an affinity for it, but just wasn't being tapped to their ultimate potential. And then finally, they already run a education and training program. So they were able to take something that they already had and realize that we can make money off of this and then use that to create a fee for service internally. So that's what I mean about kind of trying to work smarter, not harder. Instead of having to build all of these things from scratch, they did an internal audit of what do we have available to be able to raise money off things that we already do. Right. Peer-to-peer fundraising. So JSC wanted to develop an associates board with a give-get model that would raise money for the organization. And their goal was to expand donor outreach and create this new revenue channel that not only would raise money in and of themselves, but also be a connector out into the community, with the get model being those advisory board members or associate board members reaching out to their colleagues, their friends, their family, and introducing their organization to those folks, expanding the reach in the donor base. Um, so they established a associates board, which required members to donate at least or raise at least 5,000 in a commitment memo so that everyone who signed up knew what the deal was and what they were signing up to do. Um, and through that, they adopted 8 associate board members and raised over $68,000, which is well beyond what the original Give Get was. So obviously a program that worked really well. The commitment memo made sure that the folks who signed up were truly aligned and knew what they wanted to do and what was being asked of them, and they were able to knock it out of the park. Great. So let's talk about an internal fee for service model. Um, so Justice Outside, to raise unrestricted revenue from their training program, Justice Outside created and hosted an institute to train a group of consultants. So Justice Outside was doing fee-for-service work already, but it was taking a ton of time for them. And so they were really strapped and low with capacity. So what they tried to do was figure out how to outsource their trainings that they were already doing so they could operate at scale. And that would also allow them to free up time internally to take on other work. So what they did was they created and hosted an institute to train a team of consultants around their 4 most popular trainings that are easily deliverable and they know were successful. And they track their participant success across this. Um, and so this was a resounding success for them because they were able to operate at scale and also free up time. So Justice Outside only spent 25 hours consulting rather than 195 hours that they spent in the past doing that. And with the consultants now online and able to train in the same way, they made $60,000 in the first half of 2023 and expect to make over $370,000 in the next 3 years doing this work. Um, so a large scale amount of growth and also freeing up so much more capacity. They're doing what, not even 10% of the time that they spent before doing that fee for service work. And then fee for service external. Uh, so the Water Collaborative is a environmental organization in New Orleans that really wanted to um, figure out how could they connect their work with the tourism that happens in their area. So they created what they called green tours, which are walking tours. So if you've ever done a walking tour in a major city, you're familiar with the concept. But this tour was focused on New Orleans history with water, and with environmentalism. And so it was very different than your traditional tour, which gave them some uniqueness. And their goal was not only to raise money through doing this work, but also to raise awareness for their cause as well. So they wanted to develop this to have that steady income stream, but also do community and regional outreach. So they self-recorded some tours that people could purchase and then go on their bikes and do at their own pace, as well as hosted in-person tours of the French Quarter through Airbnb experiences, as well as offered custom tours, and raised $133,000 over the tour series and had hundreds of people connect with their work, and being able to understand where they where their work is and how that impacts their community there in New Orleans. And the great thing about this, again, they only technically, quote unquote, donated to the Water Collaborative through this direct purchase. They're not technically donors. So these are folks that can still give an actual like donation and gift later on in the year. So it's a great way of almost like doubling your impact and doubling your revenue. And finally, we can talk about merch. Um, so Elmdon wanted to build a base of supporters through creating culturally relevant merch. And I believe, do we have someone from this org on the call? I think so. Maybe. I thought someone mentioned that they were from here earlier on the call. So if you are, would love to hear how this went for you, to be able to talk about this. But basically, um, this org released a series of bandanas that embraced the importance of arts and culture to their work during the pandemic, reinforcing safety and masking and protection from the virus. The art was featured around social justice artists and promoted through targeted Instagram and other social media ads. Again, connecting, something that is relevant to your base, something that they need that's timely, but also framed in a way that they would enjoy. And so they generated nearly $46,000 in bandana sales. And we're expecting to sell off the rest of their leftover stock for another 65,000. And being able to connect with these donors, develop over 160 sustaining recurring gifts over the course of the year. So those are just some examples of things that you can do in real terms to connect your work in different ways and raise revenue from it. But wanted to open up the floor because I know we only have 9 minutes left to answer some questions around either any of the case studies, IRG projects that you have started or want to start, or just any fundraising questions in general. Hi, Sarah. We'll be sending the slides around as well. So you'll get the slides. You'll also get the recording, which will be visual as well. Great, Xander. I'm glad this was a little bit helpful. Do you all do any IRG work currently? And are you thinking of starting your first program or maybe adjusting or adopting some work that you're doing now? Gotcha. Yeah. So, like I said, the main things, figuring out what you have at your disposal, how much money you're willing to spend, and your capacity to actually fill out the work, are going to be the most important things in figuring out like what kind of IRG program um, you should build first. So take a look at the different types when the slides go around, and hopefully we can find one that works for you. And don't forget about the consulting hours. Happy to help support through that. Myra asks, as you know, there are orgs that are invite only. How can we connect with them to get that invite? Great question. So institutional funding is becoming more and more invite only. So that's what we're talking about when I was saying you want to make a warm connection. So the first thing that I would do if an org is invite only is figure out how do I connect with the program officer who would be in charge of my department. So, if they're a multifaceted foundation, there are often multiple program officers. Try and connect with them. Either if you can find an email, that's great, but also LinkedIn is a great resource. To find foundation folks. If you can find their name on the website, look them up on LinkedIn, reach out and try and connect with them on there, chat and try and establish a call, let them know who you are, what kind of work you do, and that you think that there's some alignment between what they're funding and what you're doing. And then just figure out what their funding cycle is, if they're accepting new donation or new donors. Oftentimes, if they're closed, that's why they're trying to limit the amount of folks who apply because they have a limited amount that they can give. Um, but that's how I would go around trying to start and building that connection. Great. Any other fundraising questions, y'all? Victoria, I know you were looking for some IRG answers to gap fill. Hopefully this helped. You have some things to think about.
Hey, yeah, this helped a lot. We are moving to a membership model, but I'm realizing that I might have confused it with a revenue generation model because I'm providing them with resources. I was a nonprofit consultant for a decade, and I'm basically just giving them all of the training that I used to run, and that's
Mhm.
their membership benefit. But I'm wondering if I should break those into like different things. Um, yeah, because I was gonna launch a small donor campaign and try to run it myself. We don't have a development team, and I'm now realizing that maybe that is the literal hardest way to go.
Yeah, probably.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, again, if you have it, reuse it. I think that there are a couple different things that you can do. Like if you have trainings are that you're willing to offer, you can use it in a membership model for individuals, right? That they get access to the trainings, but you can also use that to parlay with organizations as well, that they can help support your org's work through getting a fee for service for your training models or your curriculum that they can integrate with their work or hire you or your org to do that kind of like training consulting, right? So there are different ways, depending on who your target demographic is, to reuse and repurpose the same type of material. And that might be your easiest bet to not have to rebuild everything from scratch. I think small donor definitely is important, but if you have things that you can use to build sustainable funding, focus on that and just think through what are the best times of year to reach out to my donor base, right? So I think you said you are working in reproductive rights, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So, um, you know, Women's Month solicitation, maybe a Pride solicitation,
Hmm.
different points in the calendar that resonate with your donor base, as well as just the typical Giving Tuesday end of year solicitation. That might be all in all writing 15 emails for the course of the year. So don't break your back, but you can still raise some money through it. But I think I would focus on the thing that is the most easily transferable is what I would do.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because I also don't have access to my back end data because we are fiscally sponsored. So I've been like banging my head against the wall trying to get a CRM when I don't have that data. So like maybe smaller scale is just going to be better all the way around.
hmm Yeah, I think that at least to build, right? Because then from there you can get a new baseline. I'm not sure your exact ability to capture your data or get access to it, but you can build at least a new baseline so that say 2024 is just the first level of outreach. Early 2025, you can take a look at this, build out a donor table, see what your donor base actually looks like. How did people respond to your emails and to the membership program? And then spend 2025 building the real programming out. And then you'll have a better sense. And then hopefully get your old data back and be able to add that into a more fully fleshed program.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I'm really glad I came today.
Okay, great. Um, Well, if there are no more thoughts or questions, I will hopefully see you all next month. We're going to be talking about building internal capacity and culture to support RevGen. A lot of you all have been there before. Development teams are super understaffed, and all the fundraising tends to fall on one or two people. We'll talk about how to build a fundraising culture to help spread some of that throughout the org, all the way up to the board, and some strategies that you can use to help build that and increase your capacity. But thank you all for tuning in today. We'll be sharing these slides and the recording shortly, and hopefully see you in a couple of weeks. I hope you all have a great weekend, and thank you so much.
Thank you.